Daniel had always been the quiet one, the brother who worked methodical 12-hour days at a mid-sized accounting firm, who paid his bills on the first of every month, who kept a credit score the way other men kept a garden, with patience, with small, careful decisions, with the private satisfaction of something that asked nothing of anyone else. Claire had always been the bright one, the one their mother called the personality, and Daniel had never resented that. Not exactly. What lived between them was something more like a long-standing arrangement. She shone, he held things steady, and the family told itself this was balance. It was only when Daniel began to notice things, small discrepancies, unfamiliar accounts, credit inquiries he hadn't initiated, that he understood the arrangement had never been as mutual as he'd believed. This is a story about the particular cruelty of being used by someone you love, and the longer cruelty of having to decide what that love is worth once you know. The apartment Daniel rented on Birchwood Street was not the kind of place that showed up in photographs. It had good light in the mornings, a kitchen that was functional without being beautiful, and a radiator that clicked like a metronome through November and December. He had lived there for 4 years. He had learned to find that clicking soothing. He was 34. He worked in forensic accounting, a phrase that made people at parties tilt their heads slightly, as though trying to locate a joke they'd missed. And he was good at it in the way that people are good at things they do not particularly love, but find genuinely interesting. Numbers for Daniel were a form of narrative. Every spreadsheet told a story. Every discrepancy was a character with a motive. He had a reputation at the firm for patience, persisting with an anomaly until it opened itself up and showed him what it was. His supervisor, a tired woman named Joanne, who had been in the industry for 26 years, had once told him that he had the temperament of a monk. He had thanked her and not been entirely sure it was a compliment. His sister Claire was 31 and she lived differently. She had moved to the city 4 years ago after her divorce. A brief marriage to a man named Walsh that had produced a child named Beau, now 7, and a settlement that Claire described, depending on her audience, as reasonable or a joke or actually kind of freeing. She had reinvented herself in the way that people do when they're trying to outrun an ending. New haircut, new aesthetic, new social media presence that documented a life of curated brunches, weekend spa trips, and the kind of casual luxury that seems effortless because the effort is in the editing. Daniel followed her accounts the way you follow a weather report for a city you don't live in, with mild interest, without much investment. They had dinner together once or twice a month, usually at a restaurant she chose and he paid for. And these dinners were comfortable in the specific way that family dinners are comfortable when nobody is saying the thing they're thinking. Claire would talk about Beau, about a trip she was planning, about a brand that had sent her something, about a woman she'd met at a wellness retreat. Daniel would listen, ask the right questions, refill her water glass. He was good at the mechanics of attention without always providing its substance. And Claire, he had noticed, rarely asked him questions that required more than a sentence to answer. This did not feel at the time like anything other than the ordinary texture of their relationship. It was in October, on one of those evenings, that he first noticed the photograph. Claire had posted it that afternoon, a wide shot of a hotel lobby in Scottsdale, marble floors and a vase of white flowers the size of a small tree, captioned "Grateful for this life" with a small orange heart. Daniel had seen it on his phone before dinner and registered it without really registering it. She traveled sometimes, she documented the traveling. This was simply part of who she was now. But at dinner, when she mentioned Scottsdale, she mentioned it casually, in passing, the way you mention a place you've been to recently. And something in the back of Daniel's mind, that same instrument he used at work, the one that noticed when a thing didn't quite add up, moved slightly, like a compass needle responding to something it hadn't yet identified. That hotel looked expensive, he said. Oh, it was a rate, Claire said, waving it off. You can get these rates if you know where to look. Which card did you use? She looked at him over her wine glass. Why does that matter? It doesn't, he said, and meant it, and let the subject go. But the compass needle didn't settle. It held its position, pointing at something he couldn't name yet. While the dinner continued and Claire told him about a brand collaboration she was negotiating, and Beau's new obsession with building kits, and Daniel nodded and listened and thought, without knowing quite why, about a credit inquiry he'd seen on his report 3 weeks ago for an account he hadn't opened. He had meant to look into it. He had been busy. He would look into it this week, he told himself, walking home in the October cold. The city lit up and indifferent around him. He would look into it, and it would probably be nothing. A bank error, a processing mistake, the kind of clerical noise that showed up in financial histories the way static shows up in old recordings. It would probably be nothing. He went home. The radiator clicked. He went to sleep. The thing about working in forensic accounting is that it changes your relationship to coincidence. You stop believing in it not because you become paranoid, but because you understand, in a precise, technical way, that patterns are not accidents. A single anomaly is noise. 2 anomalies in proximity are a question. 3 anomalies form a shape, and shapes have meaning. Daniel found the first one in October. He found the second in early November. It was a store card, a home furnishings retailer he had never shopped at, because his apartment was furnished in the way of a man who chose function over aesthetics and saw no reason to revise that choice. The account had been opened 18 months ago. There was a balance of $4,200. The minimum payments had been made, barely and not always on time, from an account he didn't recognize. He sat with his laptop at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening and looked at it for a long time. Then he pulled his full credit report. What he found there took him the better part of an hour to map. 3 accounts he hadn't opened. 2 credit inquiries from institutions he'd never contacted. A car loan for a vehicle he did not own and had never driven. The total exposure was somewhere north of $30,000. The accounts were between 7 months and 2 years old. He did not feel the thing you might expect to feel when you discover this. He did not feel panic or fury or the urgent need to call someone. He felt the very specific feeling he sometimes felt at work when a set of numbers finally resolved into their real shape, a kind of cold clarity, and beneath it, something that was not quite grief but was in the same territory. He made a cup of coffee. He sat back down. He looked at the addresses associated with the accounts. 2 of them used his name and his social security number and a street address in a part of the city he didn't live in. One used his name and an email address he didn't own, a variation of his own, with an extra letter, close enough to be plausible, far enough to route responses away from him. He recognized the street address. He had dropped Beau off there 6 or 7 times over the past 2 years when Claire needed an extra hand. It was Claire's apartment building. He sat with that for a while. Then he opened Claire's Instagram. The photographs were all still there. The hotel lobbies, the restaurant tables, the careful still lifes of skincare products and good coffee. He scrolled back through 2 years of it, looking now not at what was in the photographs, but at the arithmetic of them. The frequency of the travel, the quality of the things she showed, the implicit cost of the life being documented. He thought about her job, which was part-time marketing consulting. He thought about the divorce settlement. He thought about the comment sections full of living your best life and goals, and the small orange hearts. He thought about the credit inquiry in October and the car loan and the furniture account and his sister's apartment building address. He closed the laptop. He did not call her that night. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he decided what to do with what he knew, and he understood, with the training of someone who had spent a decade working with evidence, that confronting someone before you have the full picture is how you lose the picture. You become the accusation becomes the story, and the story stops being about what actually happened. He called his bank instead. He called the credit reporting agency. He spoke to a fraud specialist at one of the affected institutions who walked him through the account history in a flat professional voice and told him the accounts appear to have been opened online, with documentation, a scan of something, a form he couldn't say exactly that had been sufficient to pass initial verification. "Do you have any idea who might have had access to your personal information?" the specialist asked. Yes, Daniel said. There was a brief silence on the line. And do you want to file a report at this time, or not yet? Daniel said. Not yet. He spent the next week documenting everything. He did it the way he did everything, methodically, without emotion in the process, letting the emotion live somewhere to the side where it wouldn't contaminate the work. He created a file. He organized the accounts chronologically. He traced the payment histories, the credit inquiries, the addresses. At some point during that week, he couldn't remember exactly when, he looked up from his work and said quietly to the empty room, I don't know. Maybe share this story or subscribe or something. The radiator clicked. No one answered. He looked back down at his documentation, and the silence after the words felt strange, even to him, as if he'd briefly stepped outside himself and then returned, and the room was exactly as he'd left it, unchanged, indifferent, waiting. He had dinner with Claire on a Thursday in mid-November. She showed him photographs from a weekend she'd just come back from, a vineyard somewhere in the hills, soft autumn light, a table set with things that cost money to use even once. She looked happy in the photographs. She looked in the way people sometimes look in photographs, like a different version of herself, lighter, less encumbered, already narrating her own life toward a better ending than the one she'd actually been living. You look like you're doing well, Daniel said. I really am, she said, and her voice had a quality he recognized. Not quite warmth, but relief, wearing warmth's clothes. He watched her. He noticed that she didn't ask about him. She almost never asked about him. He said nothing about what he'd found. He paid for dinner. He drove home. He sat in his apartment and felt the particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. He called her on a Sunday morning in late November and asked if she had time to talk, not meet for coffee, just talk. On the phone, she said yes, give me 20 minutes, and called back in 23. What's up? Her voice was easy, unguarded. She had no reason yet to be otherwise. I need to ask you about some accounts, he said. A pause. Brief. A single beat, but he caught it. What accounts? Credit accounts opened in my name over the past 2 years, he said. 3 of them. There's also a car loan. The silence that followed was longer, and it had a different quality. He had spent enough time in rooms with people who had been caught in financial irregularities to know the particular texture of that silence. The moment when someone is calculating not whether they've been found out, but how much has been found out. Danny, I'm not asking you to explain how, he said. I have the documents. I have the account histories. I know how. I'm asking you something different. What are you asking? He thought about how to say it. He had thought about this for 2 weeks, drafting it in his head while he made coffee and walked to work and lay awake in the clicking dark. I'm asking if you know what you were doing, he said. Whether you understood what it was. Another pause. Then, quietly, I needed to get Bo stable. After the divorce, I had nothing. You know what the settlement actually looked like. You know what I had. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to hold things together. I know, he said. The accounts were, I kept up the payments. Mostly, I was going to pay everything off. I had a plan. The plan didn't work. Plans don't always work, Daniel. There was something in her voice now, not quite defensiveness, but the beginning of it, the way a person's posture shifts when they sense they're about to need it. I was alone. I had a child. I was trying to build something. By using my name, I knew you wouldn't miss it. You have good credit. You're careful with money. You never carry debt. I thought. She stopped. You thought what? I thought it was borrowing, she said finally. In my head, I was borrowing. I was going to fix it. Daniel held the phone and looked at the window, at the gray November sky above the roof lines. I need you to understand, he said carefully, that what you're describing is a crime, not in a judgmental way, in a legal, technical, actual way. What you did is identity theft. I've been on the phone with fraud departments. I have documentation. Right now, I'm the one who decides what happens with that. He heard her breathing. I'm not calling to threaten you, he added. I called because I thought you deserved to hear it from me before anything else happened, and because I needed to know if you understood what this was. What are you going to do? Her voice had changed, stripped of its layers now, down to something smaller and more honest. I don't know yet, he said. I need the accounts closed. I need the balances addressed. We'll figure out a structure for that, but I need you to understand, Claire. I need you to actually understand that this wasn't borrowing. What you felt inside about it doesn't change what it was. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, she said. He believed she was sorry. He also believed she was sorry in the way people are sorry when they've been caught, which is a different architecture than the sorrow that comes before. He didn't say that. There was nothing useful in saying that. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. We'll work out a plan. He hung up and sat for a long time in the Sunday quiet of his apartment. The radiator had stopped clicking. Outside, someone was raking leaves. The sound of it was methodical, patient, rhythmic, a sound, he thought, that asked for nothing from anyone. December arrived, then January, then the pale, reluctant light of February. Daniel worked with a lawyer to dispute the accounts and begin the process of removing the fraudulent entries from his credit history. The car loan took 3 months to resolve. The store accounts took longer. There were forms, verification calls, follow-up letters. An afternoon he spent in a bank branch explaining the same chronology for the fourth time to a representative who was sympathetic in the way that people are sympathetic when it costs them nothing. He and Claire reached a private arrangement, not formalized through the legal system, not yet. A decision he made after several conversations with his lawyer and several more with himself. Claire would repay the outstanding balances on an agreed schedule. She provided documentation of the repayment plan in writing. He held the original file. He did not post about any of it. This was the difference, he thought, between them. Not intelligence, not moral standing, but this, that he processed things inwardly and she processed things outwardly. And for a long time he had understood that difference as simply temperamental, as the difference between introvert and extrovert, as the ordinary variation in how people moved through the world. He understood now that it was also structural, that the performance of a life, the careful curation of it into content, the constant broadcast of a version of yourself, could become a kind of substitution for the life itself, that you could become so practiced at showing the highlight reel that you forgot, incrementally, that the reel required an actual film beneath it. Claire continued posting. He watched, not obsessively, but periodically, in the way you keep an eye on something you can't control and have chosen not to try to. The photographs were somewhat more modest now. Fewer hotel lobbies, more ordinary moments. Beau in the park, a cup of tea on a windowsill. He wondered if she was aware of the shift, or if it was unconscious, the way a person instinctively hunches when they know they're exposed. He saw her twice in those months, once at their mother's birthday dinner in January, and once by accident at a hardware store in February. Both times they were civil, careful even, the way people are careful with each other when they're holding something that could shatter. She asked how the resolution process was going. He gave her honest, brief answers. She looked in person more tired than her photograph suggested. This surprised him less than it once might have. At the birthday dinner, their mother asked if they were spending enough time together. Claire said, "Danny's always so busy," in a light, affectionate tone, and Daniel looked down at his plate and said yeah, and let the moment pass. He noticed that Claire did not correct the implication, that the distance between them was a consequence of his schedule, not the consequence of anything else. He noticed that she had, in some way, already begun revising the narrative of what had happened, smoothing it down into something she could live alongside without too much friction. He did not call this out. He thought about it later, alone, and found that he was not even angry, or not primarily angry. He felt something more like sorrow, and beneath the sorrow, the beginning of understanding that people who use the people who love them are not always aware they're doing it. That need, unchecked, becomes its own justification. That Claire had not thought of herself as someone who could do this. which was perhaps part of how she had been able to do it. He was not, he told himself, interested in her destruction. He was interested in something harder to name, the restoration of his own sense of the ground beneath him, the understanding that he was not simply background, not simply the stable one, not simply the brother who held things steady while other people shone. He had been, for most of his adult life, a person who made himself useful and called it love. He was beginning to understand that this was not the same thing. He started, slowly, to tell a few people what had happened. Not broadly, not as a post, not as a disclosure to the wider world, but to the 2 or 3 friends who knew him well enough to receive it honestly. They were, without exception, more upset than he was, which told him something. They wanted, in varying degrees, for him to do something larger, something public, something that would give the story an appropriately forceful ending. He understood the impulse. He did not share it. "You too calm about this," his friend Marcus said over beers in March. "I don't think I am," Daniel said. "I think I'm exactly calm enough." Marcus looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I know what I'm doing," Daniel said. "I just don't need an audience for it." They met for coffee in April, at Claire's suggestion, at a place near her apartment that he hadn't been to before. Small, good light, the kind of neighborhood cafe that has a specific demographic regularity. Laptops, reusable cups, the low ambient score of quiet industry. She was already there when he arrived. She looked well, more composed than February, more settled in herself. She was wearing a gray sweater he didn't recognize, and less makeup than usual. And she had Beau's drawing of a rocket ship tucked beside her coffee cup, as though she'd forgotten it was there, or had forgotten that he might notice it. They ordered. They talked a little about Beau, who had started a new school year and was, according to Claire, finding his people, an expression that made Daniel feel something warm and inarticulate and quickly contained. They talked about their mother, about a plumbing problem in Claire's apartment that had taken 3 weeks to resolve, about a documentary they'd both apparently watched and neither had mentioned to the other. Then there was a pause, and in the pause they both understood that the surface conversation had done what it was supposed to do, had established that they could still occupy the same space, still speak in the register of ordinary life, and that something else needed to happen now. "I've been thinking about what you said," Claire said, "in November. About me needing to actually understand what it was." He waited. "I think I did know," she said. "I don't want to tell you I was in some kind of fog. I think I knew, and I found ways not to look directly at it. I told myself I was going to fix it before you ever found out, and that meant in my head it would be as if it hadn't happened." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "That's not how things work. I know that. I knew that then, if I'm being honest." "Yes," he said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "That's not." She stopped. "I'm not asking you to say it's okay." "Good," he said. "Because I'm not there yet." She nodded slowly, looked at the table. "Are we?" She started again. "Is there still a we, do you think? As in, as a family, as something?" He thought about this. He thought about the clicking radiator, the credit report, the quiet Sundays that had preceded November, the particular kind of tenderness that survives damage not because it's strong enough to overcome it, but because it existed before the damage and persists through some form of cellular memory that reason can't quite reach. "I think so," he said. "I don't know what shape it has. Not the one we had before. That shape wasn't real," she said, and then looked slightly startled, as if she hadn't meant to say it that directly. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." A man at the next table closed his laptop and began gathering his things, making the small domestic sounds of departure. Outside the window, a woman walked past pushing a stroller, looking at her phone, moving through the day with the ordinary busyness of a person who has no reason to stop. "I keep thinking," Claire said, "about what I was trying to be. Online with the posts, the whole thing. I had this idea that if I could show a certain life, I could make it real, like the showing was part of building it." She shook her head. "Which is insane." "It's not insane," he said. "It's just not how it works." "How does it work?" He thought about it. You build things in the dark, he said, quietly, without an audience. And then at some point you look up and there's something there. She looked at him for a moment with something in her expression he couldn't quite name. Not gratitude, not exactly, but something in its vicinity. The bill came. He reached for it, and she reached for it at the same time, and they both held it for a moment, which was briefly awkward and then briefly funny. And she paid half, and he paid half. And they put their coats on and walked out together into the April afternoon. He walked her to the corner where their directions diverged. They stood for a moment. He thought about all the things he could say, about what she had taken, about what it had cost him, about the months of documentation and disputes and the cold specific work of recovering something she had used without asking. He thought about their mother, calling Claire the personality. He thought about the compass needle in October, the first time it moved. Same time next month? She said. Maybe, he said. She nodded, understanding that maybe meant something, and turned and walked away, and he stood on the corner and watched her go. Not for long, just a moment, before turning in the opposite direction and walking back toward his apartment, where the radiator was probably clicking and the morning light came in at the right angle, and things were, in the ways that mattered, his own. He did not look back. He didn't need to.